Where do the Sooners currently sit with the number one player in the transfer portal, NiJaree Canady? We're about to get a better idea of that as we talk to Justin McLeod of D1Softball. But it's day 2 of Canady being in the portal. It's still the biggest story in college softball. It will continue to be the biggest story in college softball moving forward. A lot to talk about when it comes to Canady, as well as other transfer portal targets that OU is currently pursuing. Let's talk about it now. Hope you enjoy. We've had some really good players since the transfer portal was a thing that have entered into the transfer portal. OU saw that last year with Jordy Ball and Jocelyn Erickson. But this seems massive, man. So in your mind, where does NiJaree Canady rank just in terms of biggest names that have entered the portal since the transfer portal has been a thing?
So from the softball perspective, I do think she's the biggest name. I mean, I think leading into this, Jordy Ball would have been just where she was from a star power perspective and everything else. I think NiJaree Canady now is in that spot of being the top dog, so to speak. Softball players have gone into the portal. I mean, she's the reigning national player of the year. Not single-handedly, but she put Stanford on her back, got them to the Women's College World Series semifinals 2 years in a row. Like, she's a superstar. She's a generational pitcher, generational player at that. So I think she's the biggest name that's gone into the portal. Her and Jordy would be 1-2 in my mind, but I do think she's the biggest we've seen go in since the portal became a thing.
And this was a rumor during the Women's College World Series in Oklahoma City. You talked to people that were there covering, and a lot of people were saying, yeah, it was a discussion then, which I find interesting. But we're still waiting for some solid information, I think, to come out on this one. And maybe NiJaree says something. Maybe she doesn't. But as of right now, it's probably mostly rumors. Is there a thought, or do you have an opinion on, is there a clear reason why she wanted to enter the portal? Does she want to get back closer to home? Is this NIL? Does she want more help offensively? Like, in your mind, based on what you've heard and what you think, what do you think were the biggest 2 or 3 biggest reasons why she didn't enter in the portal?
It is just an opinion. Don't get me wrong. There's not anything out there. Here's why I went from NiJaree or anything like that. But in my opinion, I do think the fact that, she piloted Stanford to the World Series 2 years in a row. That offense behind her really wasn't amazing. They certainly had some players who could hit this year. Maybe it was a little different from the year prior, but she played the majority of the role in getting them to the Women's College World Series. I think it's natural, and so that's why, in my opinion, I think it's got to play a part. And it's you want to play on a team that's going to have a real shot at a natty. That's not, hey, either I'm at the best it's ever seen and we win one. Maybe it's, hey, we're the best. You've got to think that's part of it. I mean, and yes, too, it's still just an opinion, but you've got to think NIL is part of it. I mean, that's the day and age in which we live. And again, NiJaree Canady is, to my mind, a generational pitcher, a generational player. Like, it's the day and age in which we live. And again, somebody who gets a team to the World Series and plays such a hardy role in them making the World Series semifinals, she doesn't have $1 million contract waiting for her in pro ball after this. So get the bag while you can, as the kids say. I probably just dated myself with my phrasing there. But so I have to think that's part of it too. Still just an opinion. We don't have any public explanations, public reasons, or anything like that. You don't have to in this day and age. But I have to think both things play in.
I do agree with you, by the way. I think she's the biggest name to enter in the portal, and it was probably Jordy Ball before this, but I think this situation's even different than Jordy, because Jordy entered the portal, but like in the same day said, I'm going home to Nebraska. So there wasn't any speculation as to, oh my gosh, Jordy Ball can change kind of the shape of the national championship race next year. No, she's going home to Nebraska. So this is different because I think for the next week and a half, 2 weeks, however long this process takes, it's going to be constantly looking for information, looking to see where it's going to be something unlike that we've seen from the softball transfer portal thus far. And with that, Justin, I got to think that regardless of where she ends up, and we'll talk about some of the teams that are rumored here, this decision is going to probably greatly shape the national championship picture next season.
Oh, it's going to have to. I mean, I think any team that NiJaree were to join probably becomes, if it's one of 7 or 8, probably becomes the national championship favorite. And I think any team she joined, I did a radio spot on Sirius XM earlier, and I said to them, she could join UNC Wilmington, and UNC Wilmington immediately becomes a World Series team in a lot of people's minds. And I don't think that's unfair. That's how great of a talent NiJaree is. But I do think, one of 7 or 8 teams, she joins them and they immediately become the odds-on favorite, and it's not close. I think it's that big of a difference maker. It has that big of a ripple effect on the national title picture and even on the World Series picture entering 2025.
Yeah, it's a big deal for sure. And of course, OU fans around here, really want NiJaree Canady. And I think OU will be young next year, but still very talented with or without NiJaree Canady. The thought around here, and this was as of yesterday morning, and we're still very early on in this process, or at least it feels like it, and things can change within the hour, as you well know. But as of yesterday, the thought was, okay, OU's going to be a contender for NiJaree Canady. Florida is probably going to be a contender for NiJaree Canady. Maybe look at Tennessee as a contender for NiJaree Canady. And Mike White in Texas, maybe, of course. Would you think that that's a fair first 4 names to start out with? Would you throw someone else in the conversation? I guess just very early on in this process with not a whole lot of information to go off of, who would you kind of rank as the main contenders at this point?
I think all those are fair names. I would throw in Texas A&M. I'd throw in LSU as other options too, because the kicker is true contenders for NiJaree Canady. I think have to fit a couple of different pieces of the profile. You've got to be, really good teams already. Like I say, any team she joins is going to become a World Series contender, no matter who it is. But I think it's a foregone conclusion. She wants to win a national championship. You got to be a national championship caliber team to most part already. I think you also have to look though at teams that have the potential of being able to put together what she deserves in NIL, what means. But I would also add A&M and LSU. I think both of them fit those bills. Talented teams, the ability to come up financially. So I think we're probably, again, like I say, 7 or 8 initially, but I think those 6 probably are my tops right now. I think, fortunately for some, unfortunately for others, I think NiJaree Canady winds up in the SEC since Oklahoma and Texas are there now. I feel like that's something of a foregone conclusion, at least in my mind right now. But I think those are probably where I'm starting on the first 6, and then see kind of as we whittle down as we go.
That no contact. Everyone can contact NiJaree Canady. That was an important part of this announcement on Monday. So I could be totally off about this. And you and I are talking 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Yeah. It doesn't feel like this is going to be wrapped up by the middle of this week or the end of this week. And again, I could be wrong about that, but I'm going to guess that, some visits are going to happen. Some offers, NIL offers, like you're saying, are going to be made. I don't know, how could you come up with a clear timeline right now? But Justin, this feels like something that we could be talking about for 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know if you agree with that, but the timeline on this decision, I just don't think it's going to happen in the next few days.
Yeah, I don't see it being a super quick. It's not going to be an elongated process because, like you say, there is no do not contact designation for NiJaree in the portal, which means anybody can reach out. And by now, she's been in the portal almost 24 hours. If 3/4 of the country hasn't reached out already, I'd be shocked. Her email inbox, her voicemails, her missed calls, her text messages. I feel for her, to be honest. I thought my phone blew up sometimes. But I don't think it's going to be a super quick process. If for no other reason, then a lot of schools are going to be, if they're going to be legitimate contenders, they're going to have to put offers together. Hey, this is what we can give you. And let's be honest, I name all these schools. What if a school like Duke steps in? We know academically it's hard to get into, but I'm pretty sure a Stanford transfer can get into Duke. Duke's a hard place to transfer into, but that's the way you can do it. So what if somebody like that steps in outside of the schools we've already talked about? So I don't think it's going to be a super long process, but I definitely don't think it's a matter of a couple of days. I think you're going to see a lot of schools clamoring for seeing what they can do, things like that. And then I think that's when it gets really interesting, because then it's time, okay, what visits does she take? Does she take all 5 of her official visits? Does she take any unofficials? You got to do all that process too. So I don't think we're looking at a super, super long process, but I don't think we're looking at anything that's a matter of a couple of days either.
Yeah, and within that timeline, I wouldn't say that this is a massive transfer portal cycle for OU. I think that they're going to lean on some of these sophomores coming back and this freshman incoming class that everyone's so happy about. But they could use, 3, 4, 5 really good players via the transfer portal. And I think that they're going to do a nice job in the portal. It's Patty Gasso in Oklahoma. But I think what's going to be interesting around here is I'm going to guess that other names are added to this roster before NiJaree Canady makes a decision, and probably some really good names as well. So I'm going to be interested about the attitude around here. Like, oh, yeah, she's okay. Yeah, really good player in the Pac 12 last year. But okay, what's going on with NiJaree Canady? Are we so focused on NiJaree Canady that we give these other players that commit the due respect? Yeah. But I'll just say that to ask this. There are other players OU is pursuing and will get in the portal. Kind of what are you hearing on the side of things about what could be cooking in Norman?
So definitely they've had some pitcher visits that are lined up. And matter of fact, and it's kind of intriguing, but there's been a couple of pitcher visits who have canceled their visits to OU and ended up going to other SEC schools. That still sounds weird to say, other SEC schools, when talking about Oklahoma. So they definitely understand and realize pitching is a need. Like we all see that looking at him. Clearly OU and Patty and everybody else realizes that too. So pitching's definitely a thing. Now, I mean, the thing too, pitching is always at a premium in the portal. This year, we've seen a lot of pitching go different places. There's schools in the SEC like Patrick Murphy in Alabama that are just loaded up with pitching already. A couple of pitchers from the portal. But I think position players, I think offense is where OU may hit the lottery in the greatest piece, just because so many of these pitchers are going different places. Actually, it's kind of funny. I used UNC Wilmington as that random example earlier. I think part of the reason is probably because they're fresh on my brain. They had 2 star pitchers. One goes to Florida, one goes to Alabama. Both go in the portal. One goes to Florida, one goes to Bama. So I think pitching going to be really interesting what happens with OU. But I think position players is where they have the best chance of really hitting the lottery and pulling some real studs. I know that Patty has said that they had visits lined up. They've got players that I know OU was kind of not necessarily the only one, but on their list early on. So I'm really curious what the offense is going to look like, because you're right. You've got these sophomores. You've even got a sizable freshman class coming in. I think we're going to have to see production from both. But I think the offense and the position players is really where they're going to have the best shot at hitting the lottery out of the portal this year, just based on what's in the portal and who's in the portal right now.
Well, just to take a peek at next year, and next year is just such a fascinating year for so many reasons for this program, because in a lot of ways, Justin, it feels like this is a new chapter of Oklahoma softball that's starting. You lose 10 seniors, and a lot of those names have been household names in the sport for a long time. So you got to kind of turn over the roster a little bit. You're going into a different conference where you're playing different teams, and you're going to have a young team next year, but that target on your back doesn't go away. How is this young team going to approach always being the hunted in every single game that they play? So I think next year is very fascinating in a lot of ways. What are your early thoughts on this team next year? I know it's a little bit difficult because the roster isn't all the way filled out, but what are your early thoughts on an OU team next year that, look, I know they'll be young, but I'm sure the expectations within the program probably aren't going to change all that much.
No, that's absolutely it. I mean, and the NiJaree piece, does she go to OU? Does she not? If she does, obviously it's a game changer in a lot of ways. But take that one off the board. I look at this OU team, very young. That's the thing that stands out to me the most, because exactly what you said is my first thought. They're very young. We saw an Ella Parker, a Cassidy Pickering, who were stellar as freshmen. But at the same time, we saw them stellar as freshmen with a Coleman or a Jennings or a Hanson hitting around them. And the sophomore slump's not where I'm going with this, but sophomore year is always different. You've got a year of college ball under your belt, but college pitchers have a year of film on you that's from college days. Travel ball hitting is great. Video there is great. But, okay, what do you look like as a sophomore? That's a thing across the board. So the fact that OU is so young, you've got some of those young players that played on the World Series stage. What does that experience mean for them? Because going into this next year, I mean, you think about how many starting spots are open, whether that's open for somebody on the roster just to step into a starting spot, whether that's open for one of these incoming freshmen or a transfer. You've got a lot of open spots, just starting positions. What is that going to look like? What's that going to look like from a cohesiveness standpoint? Obviously, it was going to happen with the senior class as large as it was and just as explosively talented as it was. There were always going to be, okay, what does this lineup look like? So I think it's fair to say that this OU lineup in 25 probably brings the most question marks of an OU team in recent memory. But I don't think that's an indictment of. I think it's just a natural piece of it. So I'm really curious what this OU team is going to look like and how they're going to respond. Because you're right, this is a 4-time national champion, and people aren't going to care. Oh, you lost so many players. They're going to hunt for OU. And there were a couple of times in the 24 season where OU faltered. That OSU series, the Texas series, even the BYU game. I'm really curious. That to me is the biggest thing going into 25. Even if NiJaree Canady becomes a Sooner, even if they add a bunch of talent out of the portal, just the cohesiveness of that roster and who's going to step into those Coleman, Hansen roles, kind of lead the team. That's where I'm most curious to see what's going to happen.
Yeah. Plus the fact too that you can't do anything wrong around here. Everyone freaks out. This entire fan base. You lost to BYU like that on a Saturday? Are you serious? Yeah, it's insane what it's like around here right now. Hey, Justin, great stuff, man. I really appreciate your time. Before you get out of here, you guys can do such a good job at D1Softball. Just go ahead and promote what you got this offseason, portal news, everything else going on over there at D1.
Yeah, so I mean, covering all the transfer portal stuff, because now we're really into the destination. So making sure we keep track of all those things, so our transfer tracker and all that. We've still got a coaching carousel going on. We've got some fun stuff we're going to roll out too, just kind of some postseason, whether it's player rankings or transfer rankings, just based on how they did versus prognostication. So we've got some fun stuff coming this summer that hadn't been done before. I'm really excited about that stuff we're going to unveil. It was going to be a full summer. It's an off season, but the content really doesn't slow down. So it's still full steam ahead. I think it's going to be some really fun stuff.